How's it going, my fellow snail sufferers? It's your missile guy. Last time I did a deep dive on a missile like this was the R-74 family video, and before that, the AIM-9X breakdown. So today, we're going to be doing the same treatment for a missile that doesn't get nearly as much attention as it deserves. Today, we are going to be covering the MICA-NG IR, which is France's answer to the same high off-board sight all-aspect problem the R-73 was solving on the other side of the Iron Curtain, all the way up to the development of the MICA-NG IR variant, plus an honorable mention that ties directly into the missile family's future outside of fighter jets entirely. Let's get on with my usual disclaimer. As you can hear, I am human, therefore I am capable of making mistakes. I try my absolute best to bring the most accurate information to my channel, but if you hear something is incorrect, comment below. This helps my viewers see and it helps improve my accuracy of all my videos for the future. I will say up front, the MICA family has one of the most annoying sourcing problems where even the basic name of the missile gets reported two different ways depending which source you pull it from, and the actual seeker hardware gets described inconsistently too. So where that happens, I'm going to tell you both versions instead of just picking one that sounds better. As usual, everything will be timestamped in my usual format. Let's get on with the MICA. To understand the MICA-NG IR, you have to start with the fact that it's not really a standalone missile on its own. This was one half of a modular weapon system. Development would begin in 1982 under Matra, basically a private venture before it became an official program. The goal was to replace the two completely separate French missiles with a single airframe, the Magic II in the short-range dogfighting role and the Super 530D in the medium-range interception role. Full-scale development under a real French Air Force and Navy contract wouldn't kick off until 1987. The idea from day one was modularity, one common missile body, 3.1 meters long, about 160 millimeters in diameter, and 112 kilograms launch weight, with the ability to accept two different interchangeable seeker sections. One being an active radar seeker called the MICA-EM or RF depending on who you ask, and the other being the infrared variant we are actually here to talk about today, the MICA-IR. And here's the part where sourcing gets messy. Most sources will tell you the MICA was commissioned in 1996 for the Rafale in Mirage 2000 without splitting the two seeker variants apart. However, at least one source I found states that the MICA-IR entered service in 1998, a full 2 years after the guided MICA-EM in 1999, which is odd since that would put the EM entering service after the IR did if you read that in order. So take those 2 years as contested rather than confirmed. The mid-90s to the late 90s window is the safest way to describe it. So what's actually in the nose of the MICA-IR? The seeker is a dual waveband seeker operating across two infrared bands, generally cited as the 3 to 5 micron and 8 to 12 micron ranges, which, if that sounds familiar, it's the same two-band concept I covered in my R-74 video with the Impulse 90 seeker, comparing intensity across two bands to help reject flares from a real engine signature. Now here's the part I think a lot of people watching this will find surprising, because MBDA markets the MICA-IR pretty aggressively as an imaging infrared seeker, and technically that isn't wrong, they aren't lying to you, but it's also not the full picture most people assume when they hear that term. According to at least one technical paper I found on the infrared seeker design, the MICA-IR actually uses a two-color line detector to form what the paper describes as a scanning imaging system, rather than the true 2D starring sensor most of us think of when we hear IIR. Compare that to something like the AIM-9X, which I covered a while back, which uses a 128 by 128 element focal plane array, a full two-dimensional starring seeker. It's taking an entire snapshot of the scene at once like a tiny thermal camera. A scanning line array, by comparison, will have to build that picture up piece by piece rather than capturing the whole scene in one instant shot. Now, how does that scanning actually happen? This is where I have to be honest about what's confirmed versus how this category of seeker typically works. My source doesn't show or spell out the exact mechanism of the MICA-IR specifically, but seekers built this way generally use a rotating scan mirror that's sweeping the linear detector across the target, which is building the image up row by row as it spins, kind of like a radar sweep, but for heat instead of radio waves. The IRC is a confirmed example of exactly this setup, a 128 by 2 linear array paired with a scanning mirror, so it's legitimate and established ways these seekers work. I just can't confirm the literal hardware layout inside the MICA-IR, so take that mechanism as the general how, not a confirmed MICA spec sheet detail. So is the MICA-IR imaging. In a loose sense, yes, it's producing something closer to a picture than a single hot point tracker like the base R-73's MAX seeker I talked about previously, but it's not doing it with the same hardware as a true starring array seeker like the 9X. So if you see people treating the MICA-IR and the 9X as functionally identical seeker technology, that's not quite true. They both land in the general imaging MICA-NG IR category, they're just getting there through different hardware. Where it gets interesting is the actual detector hardware. Based on what I could dig up, the underlying infrared detector technology traces back to a French company called SAT, who were producing second generation infrared detectors as far back as 1982, which is the same year MICA development kicked off, and among their early listed products was an infrared seeker for the MICA missile, straight from the source paper itself. The SAT's infrared detector work would eventually get folded into a company called Sofradir, which still exists today as a major player in the French infrared detector manufacturing. For performance figures, I will be upfront that a lot of specific detection range numbers floating around online, things like 30 kilometers rear aspect and 20 kilometer front aspect detection, actually trace back to a video game wiki rather than the official MBDA datasheet. So I can't verify those against a primary source, take them as a rough ballpark rather than gospel. Now for the actual next generation of this missile family, the MICA-NG, or also known as the MICA Next Generation. The French Defense Procurement Agency, the DGA, awarded MBDA the contract to develop the MICA-NG back in late 2018. The contract covers production of 567 new missiles, plus refurbishment of around 300 existing MICA rounds already in service, and it's being folded into the Rafale F4 standard upgrade package. The headline change for the MICA-NG across both seeker variants is the motor. It's switching to a dual pulse rocket motor, burning in two separate stages instead of one continuous burn, giving it reserve energy for the endgame against a maneuvering target. A real generational jump over the base MICA single burn motor. MBDA is citing up to 40% more range over the current MICA family from this one change alone. Now for the IR seeker, MBDA describes MICA-NG IR as using a matrix sensor of greater sensitivity, which strongly implies this is a true starring focal plane array, which is a real generational leap over the scanning line detector in the original MICA IR I just walked you through. It keeps the same external dimensions, weight, and center of gravity as the legacy MICA, so it really is just a drop-in replacement for existing launch rails and vertical launch cells. No redesign of a launcher required. Timeline-wise, this program has slipped. The original goal was to get the MICA-NG into service around 2026, and while a first supersonic test from a Rafale did happen on June 1st of this year, 2026, at least one aviation trade publication reported that as of last year, 2025, the actual in-service date had already slipped to 2028. So take the 2026 date you'll see quoted in a lot of places with a grain of salt. Actual fielded service looks like it's still a couple years out. Export wise, Egypt did order MICA-NG alongside legacy MICA stock in 2025 for the Rafale fleet. Serbia ordered Rafale F4 jets equipped with the missile back in 2024, and Indonesia has selected the naval version for their frigates. So, today's honorable mention isn't a fighter jet weapon at all. It's a ground and ship launch side of the same missile family, the VL MICA, or also known as the vertical launch MICA. Because the whole point of the MICA program was modularity from day one, that same missile body works just fine coming straight up out of a vertical launch cell instead of off a fighter wing pylon, giving you an actual short-range point defense system using the same seekers I spent the whole video talking about. France actually took delivery of its first two VL MICA batteries back in December of 2024, and Egypt is set to be the first launch customer for the naval MICA-NG version, mounted on their Go-Wind class corvettes. I think this is worth a mention because if the MICA IR and NG IR ever show up in a game like War Thunder and a ground-based SPA roll down the line, the VL variant is exactly what they would probably be modeled after. It's the same missile, same seeker, just launched straight up instead of off a rail. So wrapping this up, right now in War Thunder, France has a MICA problem, and I mean that in a good way and a bad way at the same time. The Rafale was added back at the Storm Warning update, launched with the MICA-EM as its radar missile, but no MICA IR to go with it. Its IR slot is still being filled by the older Magic II. There was actually a decent amount of discussion on the forums about this when the Rafale was first shown off, because an accurate MICA IR would functionally behave like the MICA-EM in game, except it's an IR instead. It would still receive that same lock-on after launch that it's supposed to have, fly under radar guidance until the IR seeker takes over in terminal phase, except obviously unlike the Fox 3 variant, there'd be no RWR warning for the target because it's not actually emitting anything until that IR seeker wakes up. That's a really scary weapon to be on the receiving end of if Gaijin model it in full fidelity, because it's basically an R27 ET, but it has thrust vectoring and is able to be used up close, and also can be used as far as the MICA-EM, assuming you can get a at launch, or give or take, it'll be very similar range. Realistically though, I'd expect if the MICA IR gets added, it either comes in a toned down state without that stealthy mid-course lock-on after launch ability, or Gaijin holds off entirely until they're ready to model that BVR IR behavior properly, which, given how they've handled Fox 3 so far, could be a while. I realistically wouldn't expect to see this missile until we see our next generation IR missiles, and even then, we're probably not going to get the NG anytime soon. As for the MICA-NG, given its real-world service date is still sitting somewhere around 2028 at best, I wouldn't expect to see this missile modeled anytime soon. If the base MICA IR isn't even in the game yet, the significantly more advanced NG variant is a long way off, especially for Gaijin with how long they take to do things. Anyways, that's all I have for you, my fellow snail sufferers. If you found this one interesting, consider leaving a like, hyping the video, or if you wish to support the channel even further, hit that like and sub button. It's the best free way to support my channel as we slowly grow towards my new goal of 5,000 subs, which we're only 500 away, which I can't believe that. Well, there you have it, my fellow snail sufferers. This is your missile guy. I hope to see you in the next one.